Well, good day to you. It's Joel with The King Country, dropping in to let you know that our brand new film, Unsung Hero, is in theaters now.
It's Luke here. We've teamed up with the creators of Jesus Revolution to bring you this adventure of a lifetime. It's a powerful, true story about a family uniting, growing in their faith, and facing the impossible together.
In theaters now, unsunghero.movie for more information.
Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
You're listening to Where We Are, a weekend conversation on faith, politics, family, and culture, hosted by me, Michael Ware, and my wife, Melissa. We bring our wide-ranging experiences in politics, ministry, and nonprofit life to bear as we discuss the issues of the day. On this week's episode, we have a special guest, Chris Crawford from Protect Democracy. We're going to be talking about elections, election integrity, election security, and ensuring free and fair elections and the peaceful transfer of power. I know you're going to love and learn a bit, as we did, from this conversation with Chris Crawford. You're listening to Where We Are. This is Where We Are. We are the Wares. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
And Melissa, I think we'll just get right to the episode because it's a great conversation with Chris Crawford. Chris Crawford is policy strategist at Protect Democracy, and he's also, as we mentioned in the interview, a founding board member of the Center for Christianity and Public Life. Chris is just, and I think I say this during the interview too, but Chris is just someone I trust and that I look to for guidance when it comes to many things, but relevant to this conversation are election systems and what changes have been made since 2020, the reliability of our elections, and what sort of real, actual threats to democracy might be, as opposed to sort of politics and sort of partisan criticisms and that kind of thing. And Chris helps me sift out fact from fiction and what's really worthy of concern and what is sort of not really worth paying attention to. And so we thought we'd bring him to the pod to talk about, we're 6 months out from the election, less than that now, and thought this would be a great conversation to have. So after a quick commercial break, we'll bring you our interview with Chris Crawford. This is Where We Are.
Hey friends, as you know, Where We Are is part of the That Sounds Fun network, and we absolutely love being part of this podcast network. And one of the reasons why is you can find a lot of fabulous, high-quality podcasts. And one of them that we want to highlight this week is called The Best of You podcast, and is with Dr. Allison Cook. As a psychologist and author, she will guide you through some of their toughest challenges with wisdom, humor, and grace. Together with friends and experts, she'll unpack the best of psychology from a faith-based perspective. You'll discover how to break free from painful patterns, mend your past, and discover what brings out the best of you. New episodes release every Thursday, and some noteworthy episodes that I want to point out for you where you could start is Psychology Buzzwords, Boundaries in the Bible, 3 Ways to Detox Your Heart, Soul, and Mind, and the episode Boundaries for Your Soul. If you want to find out more information and get to know Allison, you can follow along on Instagram at Dr. Allison Cook. That's at DrAlisonCook, and make sure you follow and subscribe the Best of You podcast.
Well, we are thrilled to have Chris Crawford from Protect Democracy here on Where We Are. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's really good to have you on the show, not only because of the great respect that we have for your work at Protect Democracy, but also you're a founding board member of the Center for Christianity and Public Life, and we have great respect for that as well.
That's my more important affiliation.
Yeah, sure. Good answer. look, we wanted to have this conversation with you on the show for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think particularly as we move deeper into this election year, I think a lot of our listeners hear rhetoric around our democracy, our elections, and so often it's within an electoral, like a political context.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just, I think, a lot of confusion about how seriously to take concerns about election security, about the health of our democracy, about distrust in the electoral process, and how much of it is just a sort of just one more sort of political football. And you, Chris, objectively speaking as objectively as I can, you are one of the voices I trust and that we trust to help us see through and sort through all the clutter to find out where we need to direct genuine concern. And so first, I just really want to thank you for the integrity and the earnestness with which you work on these issues. I do think that it's reflective of the Protect Democracy where you work. And so maybe let's just start there. What is Protect Democracy, and what is your role there?
Sure. I think that's a great place to start. So Protect Democracy is a cross-partisan group. We are focused on ensuring primarily that the United States does not slide into a more authoritarian form of government. So what does that look like? We are focused on protecting free and fair elections, regardless of who wins the elections. We defend the rule of law from authoritarian threats. We try to prevent disinformation from corrupting fact-based debate. And then we're also thinking, even as we're in the middle of a crisis, what should the democracy of tomorrow look like? What are some reforms that could move our democracy forward? And so my role at Protect Democracy is I'm a policy strategist for free and fair elections. So free and fair elections is my main focus. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? I lead our partnership with Interfaith America that helps faith-based organizations get involved in this type of work. And I also staff a group of experts called the National Task Force on Election Crises. And one of the things I really love about working at Protect Democracy is that we really have a group of people with a wide variety of backgrounds. The best example I think I have of that is when we were working advocating for reforms to the Electoral Count Act, which governs the process of casting and counting electoral votes. One of the people I worked most closely with on our team worked previously in her career on healthcare issues for Senator Barbara Boxer, who's one of the most pro-choice members of the Senate. And so she's working shoulder to shoulder with me, starting my career at Susan B. Anthony List at the country's largest pro-life political organization. Yeah. And so that's one of the best examples I have of something that underpins all of our work is this belief that we need to be able to build a coalition of people who are willing to put aside disagreements on politics or policy in order to prioritize a defense of democracy at this moment. And it doesn't mean that my friend and I pretend we don't disagree. It doesn't mean we just ignore that. It means that we need to preserve a system that lets us have that disagreement peacefully.
So you work on free and fair elections. That's a big part of your job. Can you just define that for our listeners? What does it mean?
I'm glad you asked that because it's something that we almost take for granted. So even working on this every day, even having this in my title, I don't think about it on that basic level all the time. So one helpful definition that the USAID uses in our context internationally is basically that free and fair elections reflect the free expression and the will of the people. And some of the key features that they list are that elections are transparent, inclusive, and trusted both by voters and the people who are up for election. The way that we talk about this often is that we think about it in terms of every eligible person being able to vote, every vote being accurately counted, and then the peaceful transfer or continuation of power. And that's a sort of key feature that's becoming increasingly important, that losing candidates should be accepting the results of an election that they have lost. And
Mhm. Yeah.
post-election activities that we saw in 2020, when you think about this sort of initial USAID definition, the efforts we saw in 2020 both undermine trust and continue to undermine trust,
Yeah.
and if successful would have overturned the will of the voters. So we really are seeing some threats to the fundamental idea of free and fair elections right now.
Yeah. So we take that, and can you tell our listeners what goes into preparing the United States for a free and fair election? Like, we're in 2024, it's happening right now. These preparations are happening, protocols, the support's put in place. What does that actually look like, and who's doing that work?
A whole lot of people are doing that work. The story of our elections is the story of...
Don't leave anyone out, Chris. Yeah, it's very important. You don't. They're all listening. Yeah,
millions of them. The story of our elections is the story of everyday people serving their communities. Something that I talk about a lot is that our elections aren't run from Washington, D.C. There's not some like big central election thing in Washington, D.C. They're run at the state level, county level, precinct level across the country. And that means that a lot of work goes into that. And it really is an ongoing process. A lot of us pay attention for a very short amount of time, but this is constant, in things like ensuring that the voting rolls are kept up to date so that there aren't people on the list who have moved to another state or who have died, while also ensuring that we're not removing people without cause or without giving them the chance to stay on the rolls. Then when it comes to voting itself, each state has its own process to make sure that voters, people who are registering to vote, prove who they are at that stage. And then people are also proving who they are when they vote. And that looks differently state by state. In some states, there's what they call motor voter, where when you get your driver's license, you can also register to vote. And I like that visual because all of us have been scrambling to get everything we need to prove who we are when we go to the DMV. That's generally like the level of security when you're going to register to vote.
Yeah.
So then when we move into the voting itself, there are lots of security measures in place. We're voting even more now by mail, voting early, while also making sure that there are safeguards in place for the voting. And then there's the post-election, making sure that all the votes are counted. There are safeguards to track the counting, audits, things like that. And so each of these stages, there are tens of thousands of people getting trained, millions when you get down to like just your regular poll workers, people getting trained to ensure our elections run smoothly.
Yeah, that's super helpful, Chris. Want to ask you another term here, and that's election security. What does that refer to? What does it mean to have a secure election?
That's another term that I think different people have different definitions. And I would probably lump together the terms election security and election integrity.
Okay.
That I think these mean different things to different people. They can be weaponized in different ways. But I see this as sort of a catch-all question about whether our system can ensure that there's not widespread voter fraud and that votes are counted accurately. It's important when we engage in this topic that we understand our system is not perfect. We have never and will never run a perfect election. When you have a large operation of the size of our elections, staffed by human beings, you're going to have issues that arise. What's important is that we have a system that can identify the challenges, have backup plans, and address them. So a few examples that I would use. And again, this is different across the country because of our decentralized election system, but there are some things that are pretty common across the country. And so a few things that people often bring up as reasons that they don't trust our elections, you actually see safeguards in place. So there's something like 95% of voters or more cast their ballot with some sort of paper involved in the process at some point. You hear people all the time say we need paper ballots. Generally, we have paper ballots. You are voting on a touch screen to start out with, or there's a tabulation machine. At some point, most of us will be able to verify the paper that we're casting to vote, and that's stored securely so that they can be recounted, checked, audited. There are also checks and balances built into the system when it comes to election observing. So it varies in different places, but most places, at the very least, both political parties can appoint people to observe the election process. In some states like New Hampshire, anybody can just walk in. You don't have to register or anything like that. You just go to the designated area. You can watch the voting. You can watch the counting. Your listeners can probably do that where they are. And then there are a lot of concerns. There's a lot of, frankly, lies about the way that our election equipment works.
Yeah.
First of all, states go through a rigorous bidding process when they're considering moving to different types of machines. And then those are often tested publicly. If you look for the information, you can find out how to go watch as they test the machines and make sure they're working. And then after the election's over, we saw a lot of discussion in places like Arizona and other places that tried to add different audits at the end of the process that did not follow best practices, that were not secure. The reason that was such a big deal wasn't because audits are bad inherently. It was that states already audit their elections, and there are best practices for doing it. There are ways to do it that are secure. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that these systems are in place. I think there are only 5 states in the country that don't have some sort of automatic auditing system after the election. And the closest one to a swing state is Maine. And then, like I said, there are systems in place to ensure that people can vote by mail, vote in person in ways that are secure.
Yeah. One thing you've kind of alluded to multiple times in the conversation, and it's kind of a simple, obvious thing, but there's not a federal overseer of elections. Elections are run locally, and power, decision-making power is distributed like vastly. And so when there are some vulnerabilities inherent in that, such as if a battleground state is not following procedures, and if there's things put in doubt, like you just mentioned with Arizona, that's a sort of vulnerability, because there's really not. I mean, it would be an extraordinary thing for federal oversight. Like, mostly we have state-run elections, but on the other side, it means like talk of sort of national conspiracies, and like all of this stuff are just foolish, because you're talking about coordinating like literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of election workers, and so I just wanted to point out that sort of distributed power in how we run elections, that I think overall is a net plus when it comes to our electoral system.
And especially when you get down to the precinct level and you think about election observing. When I staffed some National Task Force on Election Crises members going to New Hampshire to watch the first primary. And I grew up in Nashua, New Hampshire. And the guy running the election site is someone who was like the music director in the plays my brother was in.
Right.
Everyday people who get well trained on doing these things, and they take it very seriously. And that's part of why I love encouraging people to get involved, even if they have questions or skepticism, because they'll go and see just this beautiful civic environment, this beautiful community service that people are engaged in. It can be really unifying, I think.
Yeah.
It almost reminds me of, like, I wonder if sociologists should come up with like a democratic contact theory. You know how contact theory says the more you actually get into actual face-to-face contact with people, the less likely you are to distrust them. It's a big thing when it comes to like immigration. It's like you show people how the process actually works in their neighborhood at their actual precinct, and it starts to quell all of these bits of information that they're getting from various news sources that are sort of planting in their head that like, oh, okay, maybe I should be doubting that because, oh yeah, we need more paper ballots. And you're telling us actually 95% of people who are voting are using some form of paper.
Yeah. And maybe the next question is just sort of, can you speak to some of the anxiety there is about the upcoming election based on some of the experience that we had as a country in 2020? Like, what has changed in how elections work since 2020?
Mm-hmm. I think for starters, we're at a more dangerous baseline starting point than any other election that I've lived through, because we had such a fundamental challenge to our election
Yeah.
in the last presidential election. So, as far as what I'm more concerned about, one of the biggest things is the threat of violence and potentially actual violence. And thinking particularly the conversation we just had about these everyday people doing this work, when folks believe those conspiracies and lies, they're calling these people, they're ruining their lives in some cases. The conspiracy theorists are. And so what we end up having is people, number one, working underneath enormous stress, but number two, choosing not to work under that stress anymore and leaving the system. So we've seen turnover. One example is the state of Utah. I think 21 of their 29 counties, the top election official, this is their first presidential election because they had that much turnover.
Wow.
So those two things combined are one of the things that I'm concerned about and watching. But at the same time, we have people stepping up into those roles. We have organizations both in government and outside of government training people to step into those roles. We have a system that outlines best practices, that outlines all these different safeguards. So that doesn't erode my confidence at all in our ability to run a free and fair election in 2024. It's just part of the reality of where we are. But I also would say there are a few things that have me feeling better about 2024 than 2020 when it comes to the issue of free and fair elections, peaceful transfer of power. The first thing is that you all will remember January 2021, the fundamental issue on January 6th was that people were trying to basically break the Electoral Count Act. One of the lawyers even said, we just have to break the law a little bit or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And so some scholars, some members of our National Task Force on Election Crises, a cross-partisan group of folks, pointed out some of the ways that the Electoral Count Act, which was from 1887, could be updated to clarify the role of the vice president in the counting process, increasing the threshold for objections, and really just making sure that future elections are better secured against things like we saw. And what I was happy about watching that process is not just that they passed something as part of the omnibus bill in 2022, but the Rules Committee, which has both Senator Schumer and McConnell on it, voted this positively out of committee with something like I think 14-2 or some like super majority. It wasn't unanimous because Ted Cruz is on the committee, but it was really interesting to see this group of people come together to pass a reform, and really to do so within one election cycle is really remarkable. Like, I won't give you a whole history lesson going back to Rutherford B. Hayes and Tilden and all of that,
but you could. The point is you could.
Is that in the elections leading up to the sort of election of Hayes that got so crazy, there were signs in previous elections of what the were, and it took them 11 years after that election to pass something to try to fix it. So for the United States Congress to act quickly on meaningful reform is something I think we should be looking at positively. I also think if you look at just a little bit more of a political lens, the candidates in 2022 who ran on these conspiracy theories and sort of ran for election by running against our elections, they generally did not win. And especially the people who were running to be the top election official in their states, they did not win election. And so thinking back to where I thought we would be at this point in 2024, back in like the middle of 2022, I feel much better about where we are, not only because those people aren't running the elections, but because it showed a shift, I think, in some of the political incentives at play. And it wasn't just a partisan thing either. You had people, Republican candidates at the top of some tickets running for governor or running for the Senate, who won re-election or won election by wide margins, while people denying the results of the 2020 election were either squeaking out election or were losing to the Democrat while they were on the same ballot. And then the last thing that I am feeling positive about is that the pro-democracy field is much better prepared than in 2020.
Yeah.
I don't mean that in a partisan way at all. I think your sort of bulwark pro-democracy organizations are better prepared, and just having seen what happened in 2020 are in a better position, and we're thinking about a much broader range of possibilities for what could happen. But also, I think there's a lot of interest from nonpartisan organizations and civic organizations to just say, how can we do our part to ensure a free and fair election? Everything that I care about relies on our functioning democracy. How can I be a part of ensuring that, even as they might feel really disillusioned by the candidates that they have to choose when they go into the ballot box itself?
That's all really hopeful. I'm glad that you went towards that end of things. I think for a lot of listeners hearing all of that, because there's so much election anxiety, and not just around this stuff, but the whole of the election. You know that well. I just want to pivot a little bit. You just started working on a new initiative between Protect Democracy and Interfaith America. We're big fans of Interfaith America in this house as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're working with faith communities?
Absolutely. And the only place to really start in talking about this is just to say how wonderful Interfaith America has been as a partner in this work. When we were thinking about doing a faith project and thinking about who to partner with that had the credibility to do this type of work well, they were at the top of the list. And I'm honored not only that they said yes, but that they've been tremendous partners. So to think about the project that we're working on, I think it's helpful to go back to the experience in 2020, where I was doing some faith outreach and saw a lot of religious organizations, congregations, nonprofits who were really worried about our democracy and they wanted to help out. But too often they're sort of approached in what some of us call rent-a-collar activism, where it feels like their faith is being instrumentalized for a political cause, or it's partisan, or they might have just not felt like they had the knowledge to take certain actions to try to help make sure the election ran well. So what's been in the back of my mind since October 2020 is that there needed to be a resource for faith leaders, faith communities that outlined, here are some extremely nonpartisan ways that you can get engaged in the election, help ensure that our elections run smoothly. And a menu of options so people can take action in line with their values, their skill sets, and the needs of their community. And we wanted to do this, provide a bunch of options, and also really build out options for how to take those actions and have things like frequently asked questions, how-to guides, even templates, and telling people, take these resources, make them your own, have them message to your group in the way that makes sense to them. So if we have I'm borrowing all the expertise of people that I work with and putting it into the language that I think is helpful. If my language stinks, use your own language and make it your own. And it's a privilege to be able to be at an organization that can do that in a field that often is short on resources. So I can get into the different options that we have, tell you about how it's going. I don't know what would be most helpful for you all.
Yeah, well, I think maybe let me ask on behalf of our listeners, like for those who are concerned and interested in supporting free and fair elections in 2024, how can they get more involved? And to the extent that the partnership with Interfaith America sort of provides ways to do that, maybe you could speak to that as well.
Sure. So there's 6 main categories of activities that we lay out. And this is it's called the Faith in Elections Playbook, and it's on Interfaith America's website. One of them is
And we'll provide a link for folks in the show notes to check out this this resource.
Perfect. So one of them is recruiting or just serving as poll workers. We have a partnership with Power the Polls, which is an organization that you can quickly sign up on their website and they connect you to your local election officials so you're on the list. We need over 1 million poll workers to help run our elections at the precinct level, like we were just talking about. We need about 1 million people. One of the things that election officials are concerned about is recruiting enough people to staff our elections. So this is one really tangible way. You often get paid, which I think is helpful to everybody. But I've also been thinking about sort of social service nonprofits who have clients who are trying to get back on their feet, build a resume, you're taking a civic responsibility and getting a little bit of money might be a way to be particularly helpful for people who are struggling. We also have options of providing a peaceful presence at polling locations and especially serving as poll chaplains. Barbara Williams Skinner was on our advisory committee for this project, and she's obviously, for folks who know her, know this space, one of the real leaders in recruiting and training poll chaplains across the country. Another thing is meeting with election officials. They are generally very reachable to the people that they're serving. And there are a number of different ways to do this, whether it's one-on-one meetings or bringing a civic group of leaders together to talk with the election officials. But it's all about building trust in both directions so that if there are questions around the election, that there are relationships already and people can share the information. Another thing that I think a lot of people might not recognize is just how many houses of worship serve as polling locations.
Right.
Yes.
In some states, I think it's Arkansas and Oklahoma, a majority of polling locations are in houses of worship. And there are very specific guidelines you have to follow in order to do this in a way that respects our sort of constitutional values. But generally, we need big spaces for polling locations, and religious organizations have them. And so it's worth checking with your local election officials that if you need more polling locations to keep lines down, make voting accessible, you might either have a space or know of a place that might not even be affiliated with your organization that you could help with that. And then just things like sharing accurate information to your congregations, doing bridge building efforts, the things that can help hold our communities together in what we know is going to be an extremely divisive election. And I should mention a lot of this is building on work that Aaron Dorfman has been doing with A More Perfect Union, specifically for Jewish communities. We've been working closely to try to reach communities with them, share what we're learning. And then one last thing that I definitely can't forget to mention is that in addition to these informational resources, we also have the Faith in Elections grants that we're doing with Interfaith America. So organizations who are interested in doing this can apply to receive $1,000 grants or $15,000 grants as part of making a commitment to take these actions at certain levels. And what I'm excited about with the grants program too is that it's up and running now. It's been up and running for months, and we're hoping this can help build some capacity for groups that just need a little bit of funding to take on something like this in addition to their everyday work.
Yeah, that's tremendously helpful. Chris, maybe I'll close with this. You've spent so much time with election officials, with folks who are really, both have and feel a burden around our elections. I know how hard you work in your job, and I think there are a lot of folks, as we talked about earlier, that are sort of concerned, and as we head closer to the election. I wonder if you might just close by telling our listeners how they can pray for you, pray for the election, pray for those who are charged with civic duty over our election system.
I feel very unqualified to answer that question. But I'd say this. I think something in your question that I think is incredibly valuable is I think when we pause to pray for other people, we're pausing to recognize their humanity and that they're made in the image and likeness of God. And I think that is not the general framing that we bring to our politics. I don't need to tell you that. So first, everyone should read your books and that will help them think about how they can pray about our politics. But I think especially as folks are thinking about how they're going to get involved and just think about the basic building blocks of our elections, think about and pray for the people who are doing this work day in and day out, who are not in the public eye, who are not doing it in any way that draws any attention, but who just feel like they should be helping their neighbors vote and make sure that things run smoothly. Because it really is a beautiful thing to see. When we did our New Hampshire trip, I didn't realize on our way there how meaningful it would be to observe elections in such a direct way. So much of the work that we are doing is resourcing the folks who are on the front lines of this work. And so watching these people who take this work so seriously as they were carrying out these duties throughout the day, but especially getting all the information out of the voting machine and going over and double checking and watching the checks and balances at work, in addition to being just sort of interesting, it also was beautiful and it was joyful in a way that I wasn't expecting to be as emotionally moved by that. So I think remembering the humanity of the people who are our election heroes, doing this work day in and day out, is one sort of spiritual discipline that I hadn't even thought of before you asked that question. So thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for educating us.
I learned things.
Yeah,
so thank you.
Yeah. What's the best way for folks to follow your work, the work of Protect Democracy, especially in the coming months?
ProtectDemocracy.org is Protect Democracy's website. InterfaithAmerica.org will get you the link for the Faith and Elections Playbook. I really would encourage your listeners to just take the time to go through those resources that we've made with Interfaith America, because I really think that everybody will be able to find something that they will be interested in doing. I think you all do such a good job with your work of helping people discern political issues, how to vote, how to engage in politics at a sort of high level. And I think this can be helpful for people to find what's the one more thing they can do in addition to voting to help ensure that our democracy can long endure.
Yes, that's a good way to close. Chris, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
It's the end of the weekend, but I still wanna turn up. Yeah, I still wanna turn up.